we smash cut to the opening graphic, like The Witcher, Grand of Truth. Meh, there's the graphic. I just had James proofreading some of the transcripts for last season.
Yeah.
And he's like, Alyssa, I had to figure out how to properly transcribe meh because you say it so much. Welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair, a global Witcher podcast. My name is Alyssa from GoodMorhen, and I'll be your host as I, and our international hanza accompany Geralt of Rivia and his destiny, Cirilla of Cintra, across the continent. This past Monday and Tuesday, I celebrated my birthday. So thank you so much for all of the birthday wishes. I had a lovely start to 30. This episode, we welcome Mia the Bard and Jeanette of Brokilon to our Patreon. Jeanette joins our producer-level patrons Louise of Covier, the owner of the Churlish Porpoise, Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B., Ava of Gullet, B. Haven of the Edge of the World, Charlotte from Vengerberg Glamarye, Red Kite, the Original Roach, Cotterier's Cat, Libby, Claire Odell, Jenny Mundilovich, Wolf, Corey from the US, John of Roblia, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, Kyle the H2 Ho, Psilocybe Sorcerer, a Toussaint Knight, and Roxas. If you'd like to hear more about becoming a patron of the show, head over to patreon.com/breakfastinbeauclair. As for this episode, Charlotte from Vengerberg Glamarye and Elsa from France call in to kick off our discussion of Netflix's The Witcher Season 2 with episode 201, A Grain of Truth. Join us as we discuss the role of a script editor, the parental relationships between Yennefer and Tissaia and Ciri and Geralt, comparisons to Sapkowski's short story, the ancient art of bucket swinging, and Elsa breaks down the big question of The Witcher Season 2. In our mid-episode news segment, Tidings from Toussaint, Lars from Witcherflix shares casting speculation and production updates for The Witcher Season 3. After the break, don't miss our listener call-in segment, Dear Friend. Without further ado, let's get to our discussion of Netflix's The Witcher 201, A Grain of Truth, Part 1. Welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair. My name is Alyssa, and today I'm joined by two guests from around the world. My first guest is originally from Burgundy, France, and pursued film in Paris before settling in London, where she currently works as a script reader and researcher in the film and TV industry. She's a fan of The Witcher and an active member of the Hanza Discord. Please welcome Elsa from France. Hi, Elsa.
Hi.
My second guest is a returning fan favorite here at Breakfast in Beauclair. She is based in North Carolina, where she runs Vengerberg Glamarye, an independent online shop specializing in lore-accurate Witcher-inspired perfumes. Please welcome back Charlotte from Vengerberg Glamarye. Hi, Charlotte.
Thank you so much for having me back. It's always a pleasure.
Charlotte, I guess it's been maybe a year and a half since you were last on the show. Didn't you just recently hit a pretty big sales milestone?
Yeah, I hit, I think it was 1,500 sales on Etsy. Yep.
That's so many sales.
It's a lot of sales.
That's amazing. Congratulations.
I can't even really, comprehend that. I'm like, wait, I filled, 1,500 little jars?
Well, if it's individual sales, does that mean the individual products, or is it you can have 3 to 5 items per sale?
I mean, you can have, 3 to 5 items in a sale,
Oh.
so I'm just it's a little hard for me to really conceptualize.
Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely incredible. It's been really cool to just see your success and your shop grow over the last, 2.5, almost 3 years that we've been friends.
Well, I can certainly thank you for helping with that, because I definitely wouldn't have had nearly as big of an impact on the Witcher community without you involved. So my hat's off to you. I bow.
If I could virtually hug you through the screen, I would. One day we'll get to it. One day we'll get to it.
Yep. One of these days.
I spent so much time, I feel ending up on your shop on Etsy and being oh my god, these are so cool. And it took me a while to make the connection and to be oh no, actually, that's Charlotte from the Discord.
Hi,
and,
I'm a person.
Yeah, it just looks really amazing. Yeah, it's just really nice to put a name on the Etsy shop, I guess.
Yeah. Actually, just in case people are curious or there have been like longtime customers of the shop, because now that I'm thinking about it, I think I got my original Vengerberg Glamarye 2 years ago. Now that I've had these jars for a while, and our community may have bought some around that time too. How long should we be using bottles of Vengerberg Glamarye for? Is there an opportunity to get them refilled? Yeah, what's that process like?
So typically, I recommend, that they have about a year lifespan.
Mhm.
But I think it really comes down to how you're storing them, how frequently you use them, and like exposing the cream to air. And also just like, does it still smell right? Does it still smell good to you? As far as like an expiry date, I'd give it about a year. But personally, like my personal jars, I've had them longer than that. I find that like I use a relatively small amount when I use it because it's like a pretty concentrated fragrance. So it may take you longer than that to get through a bottle. But if the fragrance, begins to turn due to exposure to air or, the cork doesn't really fit in the bottle anymore, I would definitely recommend replacing it. I'm working on a refill system just because the glass jars sort of beg for that. They're reusable and they're cool and they're glass. I'm trying to figure out a way to do that. I sent out my first prototype for like a little refill, like icing bag to a friend of mine.
Oh, cool.
And they said it worked really well. So that's in the works. I don't really have a refill situation up for sale yet, but I am working on it. So just like to be safe, I'd give it about a year after the day that you buy it. But also just kind of use your judgment. If it doesn't smell right, and you don't like the way it smells anymore, or if it's been exposed to air too much, or like the cork is starting to look funky, then I would definitely replace it.
That's good to know. I have so many of them and I've just like haven't left my house in 2 years.
Yeah, it's like...
So there have been like very infrequent opportunities to really wear them that often since it's just me. And I don't need to impress myself. So with body
Maybe
glitter.
you should. Wear it for yourself.
This is true, yeah. That's really awesome to just know, especially I think as a lot of people in our community have been purchasing bottles of Vengerberg Glamarye, and I love seeing all the photos that like people share with you and share with me about their own bottles.
I'm just glad people like it. I'm glad they're enjoying it. It makes me happy.
So, Elsa, I'd love to turn the conversation over to you as well. I'm so curious about the work that you do as a script reader and researcher.
Yeah, so I always panic a little bit when people ask me what my job is, because I feel like I just do a lot of different things. And also the pandemic got a little bit in the way of where I was hoping to be right now. But yeah, so I decided really early on when I was a teenager that I wanted to work in film. So I studied film, and that was like the early 2000s because I'm really old. So so that was roughly around the time what we call the golden age of TV sort of hit, when there were all those shows like Breaking Bad and Mad Men, stuff like that sort of starting coming out, and suddenly TV was kind of cool again, and it was, considered an art form in the same way that film suddenly was. And I was particularly interested in British television. I also liked British cinema as well, so I was like, well, it would be kind of cool to work in that area. So I ended up moving to London at the end of my studies and kind of made my way up as you can say I am right now. I basically found a job, like an internship, as sort of what we call a runner. Yeah, like an office runner at a production company. And then I worked as a development assistant and an office assistant, and I've been working freelance as a scriptwriter and researcher for a year and a half now. I'm hoping to sort of make the jump to script editor in the next few months/year. Obviously, all things I can explain because I know that those job titles don't always mean a lot from the outside. Basically, I mostly work for production companies, for one in particular. So they send me scripts to read, which are from writers they may be interested in working with. And so I have to sort of assess the writing, assess whether they could be good for certain projects the company has at the moment. And I also read like manuscripts and books the company might be interested in purchasing the rights for. And I also work for screenwriting competitions, which are quite a big thing in the UK film and TV industry. So reading all the scripts that writers send to the competition and sort of help picking which one are going to be able to go on the next stage. I
Mhm.
also work with writers, worked a little bit in writers' room. I'm hoping to do a bit more of that in the near future. So so helping them developing scripts, helping them developing ideas, researching projects and stuff like that. It's been really fun. It's been almost 10 years and I feel like I still have a lot to learn, but it's yeah.
Yeah, I feel like certainly in any industry, I feel like the more you learn, the more you realize you have more to learn,
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
such a good place to be, I think.
Yeah, no, exactly. There's moments where you're like, oh God, I just know nothing. And then you're like, well, you've been doing that for almost 10 years. You know some stuff. You
Yeah.
don't know everything, but you know some things. Yeah, and it's just really nice. That's one of the many things I love about it is that you're always learning new things. Like I love reading, I love stories, so it's just such a privilege to be able to read so many things and so many stories, and to have writers who let me in and who allow me to help them and guide them. Because also there's often this idea that writing, even script writing, is a very lonely job, a very solitary job. But I like that it's actually a team effort, and we're all working together to try and tell the best story possible and in the best way possible. So yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah. So, what is it that you really look for as you're assessing a script? Like, what aspects of the writing, the plot, the storytelling, the character development are you really taking a critical look at? Is it even like things like the feasibility of production that you're really exploring as a script reader?
Like in any art form, there's always a technical side. There's always things that you can spot and be like, this works, this doesn't. In painting, you can be like, oh, the brushstroke is not very precise or stuff like that. And there's also stuff like that in screenwriting. So, very technical things like, oh, the plot is not very clear. The dialogue is a bit like all the characters are talking in the same voice. You can be like, yeah, the world is not fleshed out enough. There are a lot of very specific things that you can look at. And then there's always part of it that's a bit hard to pinpoint. Like suddenly you're into the story and you kind of stop worrying about all those little things, about all those little technical details. Like suddenly you're just reading it and you just want to see where it's going to go. And there's a bit of this like almost magical element to it that's like, oh yeah, I'm into it. I'm into the story. This works. I'm not quite sure why, but there's something that works. So you're kind of always looking for this little spark. Like a lot of time, a script may not be perfect. There may be a few problems here and there, but if you can feel this little thing that sort of hooked you, then you're like, oh, okay, I think we might be onto something. I would be interested in meeting this person or pushing this project a little further. And also there's what we all accept is that there's a big subjective element to it. Like, taste is going to be a big thing. Personally, I don't really like true crimes. I don't really like thrillers, but I love fantasy. I love horror. I love like ghost stories and monster stories, which is relevant to our conversation today.
Yeah.
So obviously I will be a bit more, if you're like, oh, okay, this is a story about a haunting house, I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm in. It also means that I know the genre really well, so you'd better, you have to impress me. But yeah, so there's also a subjective part of it, because it's not an exact science, but yeah.
Absolutely. It's really interesting to think about like what makes a script like a good story and what makes it technically good, as you had brought up. And I'm sure that in order to have a good proposal to give to you or to give to production houses, it has to be a combination of both. Although, as you said, like writing can be a team sport. And if you have like a solid story and like decent like technical prowess, that can still be refined further with the help of editors and a production company as well.
Yeah.
That's really neat.
Yeah, it's really like, I think people are sometimes a bit precious about writing. It's like, ooh, it's writing. You have to, you have the secret gift or you don't. But I don't really believe in that. I think it's just practice and like, yeah, you need to give it a try and you need to work and you need to allow other people to read you and find nice people to read you. Find like people who will be honest, but also who won't. Just with practice, you get better and better. But yeah.
Well, I really love that you're here as well to like add to the conversation now that we're diving into the Netflix show and into what I personally think is one of the best episodes of The Witcher Season 2. Today we'll begin our discussion of Netflix's The Witcher Season 2 with episode 201, A Grain of Truth, in which Geralt and Ciri visit an old friend while Yennefer and the sorcerers of the North deal with the aftermath of Sodden. In the opening scene, a merchant and his family arrive at an abandoned estate before quickly being slaughtered by a creature in the dark. This was... Oh, I can finally say this now. If you follow me on Instagram, you know that I got invited by Netflix to like hang out in New York for a couple of days and like got to see this episode, Grain of Truth, at the Netflix office in New York a couple of days before the show came out. So I got to see this episode on a big screen while they were filming us for a little bit. This is like that opening scene in the first season. I was bugging out and I was in such a fetal position and my shoulders were hunched sitting on this sofa, like listening to the screaming on like surround sound. I hated it so much.
It was really funny because I rewatched the episode with my sister and her boyfriend who don't know anything about the books, but they've played the game. 30 seconds in, they were like, yeah, that's a Brooksa. That's the monster of the episode. And I was like, how did you guys know that? So clearly they did something good. Yeah, I quite like it. Like, it's efficient. It tells you what you're getting into. Also, what I really enjoyed is that you can automatically see that they had a little more than like $1 to make the entire show, contrary to season 1. It just looks a lot better.
Yeah.
The atmosphere is a lot better. I really like also there's a lot more nice little visual details. So, for example, in this one, there's all this shot in the village. The entire village is dark, but you can sort of see Niveland's mansion that's all lit up in the background. So it's kind of like foreshadowing where the monster is coming from. And you get a lot of little things like that throughout the episode, which I really like. Like, you can tell they were a bit more focused on the cinematography.
So I definitely agree with Elsa. The cinematography has certainly changed since the first season. And this... This might sound kind of mean, but I found this scene to be really funny. I found it to be really hilarious. And I don't know why I fixated on this, but there's this opening part of the scene where, like, they're walking into the village. There's this well, and there's a bucket swinging in the well.
That came back so often. I think that because we saw it in the subtitles and it was like bucket clinging or something.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay.
Yeah. If you turn the subtitles on, like, it's even in the subtitles. It's like,
yeah,
the
it's
bucket
like, this is relevant, guys.
So, like, I don't know why I fixated on this bucket, but I think it was because, like, the swinging of this bucket was just, like, so unnatural to everything else that was going on. Like, the wind wasn't blowing that hard. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was clearly being swung around very enthusiastically by somebody underneath it who was off camera.
I can't believe you're insulting the ancient art of bucket swinging like that.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm like, who was in charge of being the bucket swinger? I need to know who was the bucket swinger. And the travelers, like, it was nice to see them because this was automatically kind of straight to the book.
Yeah.
It's good to see them there because, like, yeah, they were in the story. But the girl's response to her mother being attacked also made me laugh because who just stands there and just screams at the sky?
Like, run. Girl, run.
Yeah, any other person would have been running for cover. But this girl, she's just going to stand there and scream at it. She's going to scream at it.
I mean, I'm not sure it was going to help, but yeah, she could have tried.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like anytime these kinds of opening scenes happen in The Witcher or other fantasy shows, it's inevitable that everybody's gonna die.
Yeah.
But it did kind of get me when, like, he was like, I'm a merchant, we're just here for the night, we're just looking for a place to stay, hello? And I was like, oh, dude, don't be sympathetic, man. Oh, no, you're gonna die. And I was gutted. Not as gutted as he was when he just got murked and just that body was severed.
Yeah, you can't get too attached.
I knew they were going to die as soon as I saw the bucket.
That's the greatest spiritual omen that we could have. Not the crows, not the crazy things in the sky or the bottoms of teacups. It's
the bucket.
It's Bill the Bucket Man at the bottom of the well.
If a bucket is swinging, like, run for your life.
Oy vey. So we see this opening scene. We smash cut to the opening credits and then are then transported over the fields of Sodden and the remnants of that battle. We had actually heard, I believe it was in WitcherCon, or they've had so many talkback shows about The Witcher at this point that they're all starting to blur together in my mind.
Yeah.
But in one of them, showrunner Lauren Hissrich had mentioned that Declan DeBarra, who wrote this episode and also wrote Blood Origin, in the script, he had said, like, piles of Nilfgaardian armor burn. And so that's the pan that we see as we go over Sodden, where Tissaia is searching for Yennefer amongst the dead, and then she briefly meets Geralt and Ciri, who are also searching for the sorceress. I kind of like this scene. Like, I think it makes sense for what happened at the end of season 1.
Yeah.
Geralt would find his way here because Sodden is apparently close to where Ciri was, and
Yeah.
Tissaia is still there. So we see her using, I don't know if it's necromancy or something, to see into the dead's final moments, which is also really cool. And then Geralt comes out of the mist.
Yeah, you always need a good new season introduction of your hero, and obviously emerging from the mist is, yeah, that's a good shot. Yeah, I really like this scene. I really love the idea of Geralt and Tissaia are like the two most important people in Yennefer's life, and so it's kind of nice to see them meet. And also, I just really like this idea of Geralt thinking that Yennefer is dead, because obviously A Grain of Truth is all about like lost love and true love and everything, so it really gives some sort of melancholy to this whole story, because obviously he's lost what he thinks is lost, the woman he loved. Yeah, so I think it was a nice touch, and also it's kind of a nice nod to the books, because I feel like in the books, Yennefer, Ciri, and Geralt spend their time thinking that the others are dead and looking for each other.
Yeah, that's all The Witcher is just a continental game of Marco Polo.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it.
So I thought it was like a nice nod to that, and obviously it had a nice weight to the story, because Geralt is sad, and so are we.
Well, as a pretty big fan of the books, seeing these characters meeting at Sodden is very confusing, but I understand why they did it for the show. For me, I generally just kind of find it odd that they made Tissaia such an integral character here at this point. And I realize it's supposed to be a really heavy, sad moment. I have the opposite reaction to everything that I'm supposed to have. That's sort of like how it feels for me. There's this moment where Tissaia is looking for Yennefer using this necromancy. Vilgefortz comes up and just says she's gone, or you're not going to be able to find her. And she just turns around and literally does the anime scream of Yennefer's name 3 times in a row. It made me laugh. I'm sorry. I was just wow, really? Yennefer! Just
Yeah.
It's sad. Yeah, it's a sad scene.
Yeah. I mean, I do like overall the changes that they've made to Tissaia's character in the show, just because, I didn't connect with her as much in the books as I do in the show, just because, one, Maena is just incredible.
Yeah.
She's so good, and she brings so much depth to this character, and she's just stunning on screen to watch, and she steals every scene she's in. I think it is, if you try to map the show to the books 1-to-1, I think there are multiple reasons why this feels weird. But,
Yeah.
like I said, I feel like for the sake of the show, it's almost like a little bit of closure, even if it is false closure for Geralt and Tissaia, that they kind of have this moment sitting in the reality and the acceptance of what they believe has happened, and then they part ways.
Yeah, because the confirmation, that he believes that Yennefer is dead is just generally really important. For Tissaia to deliver that's a nice way to do it. It's a good way to arrange it. And I do like that they, gave more to her character in the show. I definitely agree with you about, her character in the books sort of being a lesser known and sort of less talked about. But I found her character in the books to be really intriguing. So I'm curious to see, the things that they do with Tissaia's character in the show.
Yeah. It was one of those things where I read books after watching the show, and reading the book I was like, oh, okay, that's why she's so important in the show, because you can tell that she's kind of like Yennefer's Vesemir, so you need a bit more of that mother figure. And you can tell there's going to be a point where Yennefer is probably going to have to choose between her and Geralt, and between her and Ciri and Geralt. So I guess that was kind of a way to sort of reinforce how important their relationship is, and that, Tissaia really care about Yennefer as much as Yennefer care about her.
Yeah, and that's something really interesting that you bring up, just because I've heard Lauren Hissrich talk in interviews about how, if I'm paraphrasing this correctly, they didn't necessarily need to teach Geralt how to be a good dad, or they chose not to spend this season figuring it out because, to Lauren's point, Geralt has learned how to be a father from Vesemir. He's learned how to be a brother from all of the other Witchers in Kaer Morhen, who we'll meet in the next episode. However, Yennefer has had the opportunity to learn how to be a mother figure from Tissaia, which I think has the potential to give us a lot of understanding about how Yennefer could mother Ciri in future seasons. So it's really interesting to bring that up and see how that generational foundation is set with season 1 and then here in season 2 as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I'm excited to see how it's going to play out a little further along.
After leaving Sodden, Ciri suffers from nightmares about the fall of Cintra and the Black Knight on their journey. So this is a small little scene between Geralt and Ciri. Ciri is having nightmares, which eventually wakes her up. In a moment of, I think it's less comfort than it is relatability, Geralt says, "I sleep like shit too." And Ciri responds, "You don't sleep at all." Geralt says, "It makes for fewer nightmares, except for the ones about the rock troll. Overly friendly, tough image to shake." And it's just like a cute little nod to, I think, the video games in which there are a number of rock trolls. A lot of them are friendly, and Gwent as well has a famous rock troll named Shoop. And yeah, so the rest of the scene takes place. Geralt explains the Law of Surprise to Ciri and her father's decision to invoke the Law of Surprise. And we also hear this quote from Sword of Destiny in which Ciri says, "So I'm your destiny?" Whatever that means. And Geralt says, "You're much more than that, Cirilla." There's certainly like a moment here. I think that given that they've only maybe met that day or the day before, Ciri has been hearing about this man all of her life, but there's still that level of trust that they need to establish. So this almost feels like a timid footstep toward what will eventually become a father-daughter relationship. But right now it's just kind of like poking the small child with a stick and being like, "See, I can do it too." So he's trying. He's certainly trying.
Yeah, I'm sad that he's trying to talk her out of going to Skellige, because Skellige's the best. Who doesn't want to go there?
Yeah, it's definitely an important point for exposition for the story, for the viewers as well.
Yeah, it's a good reminder of what happened in season 1, in case you haven't seen it recently.
And it's definitely, I think, a more subtle injection of exposition and a recap than I think we've seen in other shows or even in other parts of The Witcher as well. Like, Ciri doesn't know any of this stuff, so it makes sense that Geralt is the one to tell her. And it happens in such a way that it's not like a big lit reminder that like, "Hey, this is what happened, remember?" Which is nice because it doesn't break the immersion of the scene.
Yeah, no, it feels quite organic. It feels like a pretty natural conversation. I also like the fact that Geralt tells Ciri the official reason of why he took her in. Is like, oh, okay, this is this very practical Law of Surprise thing. But then a bit later in the episode, Nivellen will ask him his personal reason for doing it, and then he kind of explains, that he's changed because of Yennefer. So it's kind of nice to see this sort of different of how he tells the story depending on who he's telling him to. And you can tell that he's not that close to Ciri yet, that you can unpack his entire tragic backstory to her. So, yeah.
It's starting to lay the foundation of their relationship a little bit carefully. So after we leave the campfire, we are suddenly brought to Aretuza in a thunderstorm, and the mages care for the wounded, including Triss, and resolve to interrogate their prisoner of war. This is, a stunning overview of Aretuza. It's like dark and it's grim, and this was actually a scene in the trailers as well. And we fly straight into Aretuza, down the hallways and corridors, eventually meeting with Tissaia and seeing Triss suffer from a seizure because of her wounds at Sodden. There's a number of mages that we see there, most notably Triss, who is bedridden, Artorius, Fringilla's uncle, who we met in season 1, as well as Vilgefortz and Tissaia.
I do like that they showed that Triss was, very badly wounded. That's an important aspect of her character. And another detail that they included from the books is that using magic is actually painful. After Tissaia calms Triss with magic, I noticed that as she's like walking away, she places a hand over her lower belly. And I like that they included that. I want to think that that's what that was about, that using magic as a woman in the Witcher world, causes a painful sensation in the womb area. And I think that's what that was about. I don't want to assume that, like, usually when women are depicted doing that, it has something to do with pregnancy. So I'm like, okay, it's either that magic is, painful in that area or, she's dealing with something else.
I mean, that's one thing I really liked in the first season, that this whole idea that magic isn't free. You always have to pay for it. You always have to, like, it's not something you do easily. And so, yeah, I think you're right, and that it's a way of showing that doing something like, doing big magic is going to impact, like, to have physical impact on you.
What I really like about this scene is that it just shows the devastation after Sodden. It's not, they had this little battle and everybody kind of walked away scot-free. You're actually able to see how frantic this magical ward is. Mages are running around trying to heal all of the wounded. You hear moans, you hear screaming, you hear pain and anxiety and panic. that post-battle feeling is really captured in this brief scene, which I think is so important because I feel like when it comes to battles in television and specifically fantasy television, usually like the battle just happens and you cut somewhere else and you don't actually meditate on like the gravity of what has just occurred and the sacrifice that it requires. I really like that we spend the time here.
I think Tissaia actually tells Artorius that they made it out, but barely.
Yeah.
And so it's nice to show that just because they're big mages with big powers doesn't mean that they can come off easy. And obviously it highlights the fact that they're all pretty desperate and, desperate times calls for desperate measure. And it kind of announces all the bad things they're going to do next to keep the upper hand.
By the end of this, we also learn that the Northern Kingdoms have one prisoner of war. At this point in the story, we don't know who that is. We can probably make a good educated guess. I know I did when I was sitting and watching it. I was like, it's Cahir. It is, isn't it? It's definitely
here.
But at this point, we, the audience, don't technically know. But Tissaia has a very, very strong resolve to break him.
Then we're like, no, oh boy.
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
I know. It's a very conflicted feeling, I feel like, for book readers. We, again, smash cut to Yennefer, who wakes in Dimeridium shackles with Fringilla and a small band of Nilfgaardian survivors.
Yeah, it's a nice setup for the complex relationship between Fringilla and Yennefer. So I'm very curious to see where the show takes it. Their relationship in the books is also very interesting.
Yeah, and I think when you add on the layers of them in the show having gone to school together, having had found themselves on opposite sides of like a huge scale battle where Yennefer completely decimated Fringilla's forces, and now she's a prisoner of war. It's such a weird and uncomfortable dynamic, I feel like. But Yennefer's not one to be pushed around. Even in Dimeridium shackles and this dress stomping around in the mud, she's still not really taking anything from anybody.
Yeah, I really like Fringilla in the book. She's such a fascinating character, and I was just really excited to see them together because it's such an interesting dynamic. Also, I think the actress playing her, Mimi Kaisa.
Oh, she's stunning. Oh my god.
She's amazing, and she's just so good for the entire season. She goes from this like very kind of shy and kind of awkward character to being this absolute badass, and you just see it all happening in her eyes. She's just so good. They just have such an interesting dynamic because, there's this sort of schoolgirl jealousy and rivalry going on, but there's also the fact that they're on different sides of the war. So, I was really happy to see them spend time together.
Before we continue our discussion, we're going to hand it over to Lars from Witcherflix for recent news on the Netflix show. When we come back, Charlotte, Elsa, and I will continue our discussion of A Grain of Truth.
Hey, it's Lars from Witcherflix, and this is Tidings from Toussaint. Welcome back, everybody. The preparation for the filming of Season 3 is well on its way and there's a lot to report, so let's head right into it. Thanks to various new casting descriptions and audition tapes, we have learned about almost a dozen new characters that will make their first appearance in Season 3 of The Witcher. According to Redanian Intelligence and the Illuminati, a fan-favorite character first appearing in the book Time of Contempt will be introduced in the new Witcher season. Milva, also known as Maria Byring, will interact with Geralt towards the end of the season and assist him in a tricky situation. In Time of Contempt, this meeting is the beginning of the iconic hanza. As always, the Witcher production doesn't use the actual character names in the casting calls. In 2022 as well, they are using code names. A female character named Marylebone could be Milva. Her description reads as follows. Marylebone possesses not only a razor-sharp wit, but a quick blade as well. Her age belies her experience, for she has been forced to mature quickly and learn to survive in a cruel world. Marylebone is described as a serious regular, so if she is indeed Milva, Milva will already be introduced before she interacts with Geralt at the end of the season. In addition, there are several more casting calls that could belong to characters from the Witcher books. According to the casting call, the character named Angel is a royal messenger played by someone who will need to know his way around a horse. This middle-aged gentleman was tired of his life and the horrors he's witnessed on the job until he heard something that revolutionized his outlook from that moment on. This is definitely Applegut, the royal messenger of King Demavend of Edirn. Another female character codenamed Parsons is described as a teenage girl convinced that she is someone else in order to become a political pawn. Without giving too much away, this could be a character named Fake Ciri. Ralph Blunden, nicknamed the Professor, has made an appearance in an audition tape and is linked to the rogue mage Reens. Blunden appears in Time of Contempt as well. He is a murderous assassin. Another character description for a female character reads as follows. Plus-sized and powerful, she is a member of a particular group of women you don't want to cross. Vivacious and self-confident, she's sure to be a match for anyone she meets in The Witcher. This character is codenamed Maida Vale, and her description could fit several sorceresses. But due to the fact that a lot of codenames start with the same letter as the characters' real names, it is possible that Maida Vale could be Margarita Loxantil. She is a rector of Aretusa in the books. Similarly, the character Greenwich's description is kinda vague. A brave and loyal soldier portrayed by an actor in his 20s who feels his fervor fade slightly when he realizes his comrades are not as committed as he is. This could be the origin story of Giselher, the leader of the Rats. But as it would be much too early for the Rats to appear, this could also be a show-only character. One last female character that we can maybe recognize from the name and description is Hampstead. She is a middle-aged married woman trapped in a loveless marriage to a man who is more like her child than her husband. Though she inhabits courtly life, her opinions more often than not fall on deaf ears. It is possible that she is Queen Hedwig of Melior, the wife of King Visimir of Redania, who already made an appearance in Season 2. Moreover, there are 4 characters that we cannot actually link to a book character at the moment and are therefore possibly show creations. First, there is Piccadilly, a man second in line to the throne, prone to a player lifestyle and not to a political one. Then there is Euston, a timid lady's maid, played by an actress in her 20s. There's Victoria, described as a gorgeous free spirit, and last but not least, there's Richmond, who is a musician selling instruments. In other Witcher news, we already learned about 2 Season 3 directors. According to Redanian intelligence, Steven Surgic will return for Season 3. He directed the first 2 episodes of Season 2, A Grain of Truth and Kaer Morhen. His other works include The Umbrella Academy, Daredevil, or Lost in Space. Season 3 will also welcome a new director. Loney Perister will make his Witcher debut in Season 3. His previous work includes shows like American Horror Story, Outcast, Castle Rock, or Warrior. As both previous seasons had 4 different directors, we can expect to learn about the other 2 directors for Season 3 in the near future. Speaking of directors and filming, Redanian intelligence has also learned that once again The Witcher will journey across Europe. After Season 2 was only shot in the UK due to the pandemic, the production will start filming at the beginning of March in other European countries. It will start in South Tyrol, a province of northern Italy with spectacular mountain scenery. Then the production will move on to Slovenia and after that to Croatia. All these countries are new for the Witcher production, but they are no strangers to fantasy movies and shows. Croatia, for example, has been a staple for all seasons of Game of Thrones. Anyway guys, that's it for me for today. I hope you all stay safe and well. We talk again in the next episode of Breakfast in Beauclair. Until then, thanks again for listening and good luck on the path.
Hey everyone, welcome to our listener call-in segment, Dear Friend. Keep on listening as members of our international Hanza share their thoughts on what we're discussing in this episode.
Hi Hanza, Maddie from Texas here. What I really appreciated about the first episode is that even though the production value of this season has obviously increased, they have not sacrificed the grit that is so characteristic of the Witcher universe. This is apparent in scenes like the Aretusa Medical Center and Nivellen's Mansion, where even though these are both magical settings, they are not perfect and pristine and polished. And neither is the magic that we can see used in either of these 2 scenes.
Hi, I'm Dennis from the United States. In this episode, I loved the practical effects they used for Nivellen's magic house. I was just as surprised and delighted as Ciri every time he used it.
Hey, it's Kara from the US. Geralt's Something More monologue may have resonated more with Ciri at the ending campfire scene instead of at the beginning after they have their first adventure together. She's starting to trust this stranger, and the emotional impact of "You're something more" may have had a greater payoff for both Ciri and the viewers at the end of the episode instead.
Thanks to Maddie, Dennis, and Kara for sending in their thoughts on episode 201, A Grain of Truth. Hear your voice in a future Dear Friend segment by emailing greetings@breakfastinbeauclair.com or DMing the podcast on social for more information. Hey everyone, welcome back from the break. When we left off, we had seen the aftermath of Sodden for Geralt, Ciri, Yennefer, and the mages of the Northern Kingdoms. In the next scene, back on the way to GoodMorhen, Geralt tells Ciri about the history of the keep, and he spots a suspicious animal carcass. The pair reach an abandoned village, and Geralt instead brings Ciri to a friend nearby. Geralt and Ciri arrive at Nivellen's estate. The house clatters all the windows and doors, and Nivellen bursts through the front doors and tackles a speechless Geralt. So we hear that Geralt and Ciri are on the path to GoodMorhen. I do like the use of this short story as a kind of a vehicle for getting them from Sodden to the keep. He spots what we assume is probably an animal carcass that has been attacked by a monster. At least that's what I assume. Because he, checks it out, I think, as food, and then goes and nibbles some raw meat on the side of the road. I'm unclear what that was.
I thought, because I reread the short story a few days ago, and isn't it supposed to be like a reference to the short story? Because they kind of see dead animals and he's like, oh, that wasn't killed by an animal, that was killed by a monster. But I don't know if they're not close enough for it to be Verena already.
I would assume so. I would assume that they're still within the hunting grounds of the monster that we saw in the opening scene.
Yeah, I don't understand why he eats a piece of the dead carcass. How does this help determine anything? I'm like, what about the flavor?
That was a plot point in Nightmare of the Wolf. In the last 2 episodes of Breakfast in Beauclair, we talked about Nightmare of the Wolf, and one of the things that Vesemir does in that is he knows what a mar, which is a demon, tastes like.
Oh, okay.
And that's a plot point that's used, I think, 2 or 3 times throughout the film. The taste and scent of the blood is something that he recognizes.
I see.
Oh, I thought it was to help him determine how long the animal had been dead or something. I didn't know.
I feel like that'd be a weird thing to do. That feels like something a child would do. How long is it dead? I don't know. Eat it. Put it in your mouth.
Yeah.
It's like, don't do that.
Then one thing we know from the Witcher training is that they're not big on health and safety. So, who knows?
I feel like there's definitely scientific ways that you could be like, rigor mortis. This is clearly bloated. Like, Geralt, don't put it in your mouth. Stop it.
I don't know.
Just have a little snacky snack.
Oh my god. Just flash frozen jerky. It's terrible.
Yeah, let me put my tongue on it and find out.
I quite like the idea of witches kind of eating everything to determine what it is, though. So.
But the cool thing about this scene is, of course, that we eventually arrive at Nivellen's manor. Nivellen is a wonderful and, I should be a little sparse with the word wonderful. He's a very beloved character from the short stories. Which is part of the reason why I brought Charlotte on to reprise her discussion from episode 2 of Breakfast in Beauclair with the adaptation. I should have said that in your intro. Why didn't I say that in your intro? Yeah, we finally get to the manor. We meet Nivellen, who Geralt is startled by, because as we find out here, they have met before. But in that time, he has been cursed. Also, you had a really lovely point about Nivellen's introduction that I actually saw in the notes that I really, really loved. Do you want to tell us about that?
The short story is just amazing, and I think it's a favorite for a lot of people. So I was really glad that they did it, and they moved it to such an interesting point in Geralt's story and Geralt's arc in the show. Him and Verena are such an interesting mirror to sort of Geralt and Ciri's relationships. They're almost like a sort of deformed version. Obviously, they have very different relationships, but you can see they both find echoes into each other at some points in the episodes. And also, it's a great way of introducing what I feel like is sort of Geralt's big arc throughout the season, which is, what do I do when someone I love is hurting other people, even if they can't really help themselves? And obviously we'll see that when we reach GoodMorhen in episode 2. We will see that with Yennefer, we will see that with Ciri, and so he constantly has this whole debate with himself, which is basically what is loving someone, and what's the sort of boundaries you have to put, and how loving someone can sort of interfere with his job and with the principles he has set for himself. Obviously, we'll get to explore that through Nivellen in this episode. So I feel like, the episode does a really good job of sort of establishing one of the big themes of the season and one of the big sort of questions that Geralt is going to have to ask himself throughout.
That's such a pointed and thoughtful interpretation of what has happened here and how, obviously the themes stretch across the entire season. And it's something that I certainly didn't think about as I was watching this episode or the season as a whole. And it's such a concise and beautiful way of putting it. What do you do when someone you love hurts other people? Because this is something, as I said, that we saw in Nightmare of the Wolf between Vesemir and Deglin, for example. We'll see that here with Nivellen and Verena, and as you said, with Geralt and Ciri, as well as, with numerous other points throughout the season. The repetition of themes, I think, is something that is certainly necessary for television and film, but also harks back to something that Sapkowski does heavily throughout his writing as well. So I think it's really cool to point that out and to kind of explicitly see all the examples within this episode alone. And I think having Verena and Nivellen as not necessarily a blueprint, but as a possibility of a person's response to this question is really interesting by the time we get to the end of it. And the juxtaposition between Geralt's response to Ciri by episode 8, Family.
Yeah,
I really appreciate you bringing that to the discussion, because when I saw that in the notes, I was like, oh, you're so right. Like, I had like a little mind-blown moment when I was reading your notes this morning.
Thank you. I think it was also rewatching the first episode. I rewatched it right after watching the last one. So it kind of jumped into my face and I was like, okay, this is what the entire season has been about. Because the last episode is such a good parallel to the first one, where Geralt basically has to make the choice that Nivellen has to make at the end of this episode. He handles it a bit better, but, that's up for debate. Yeah, and it's also this idea that what do you do if this person can't really help themselves? Because obviously we'll see with Verena there's this whole thing of like, is it instinct? What happens if this person is acting on instinct or is being possessed or is being forced into doing it? Like, where do you sort of draw the line? So what do you do when you're sort of stuck in this dilemma and in this position?
I definitely agree with you, Alyssa, about Elsa's noting of the mirroring in characters. I think it was a really good observation. When I was making notes about this, I was definitely thinking back to our first recording together about this story. And I think like the first thing that comes up in that recording is us talking about how Roach is the one who's just like more aware than anybody else in the room most of the time.
Oh, 100%. Geralt would not have gotten anything done without Roach and a grain of truth. He would have completely lost the mystery.
Of course. Roach is the real hero.
Yeah, Roach is the MVP here in this particular story, at least in my opinion anyway. When they come across that carcass, Roach is freaking out, and there's a reference to the games here, which I really enjoyed because I love The Witcher 3. It's like my favorite video game thus far. When Roach is freaking out, Geralt casts the Witcher sign of Axii, and in the game, your horse actually has a fear meter, and if Roach gets too scared while you're around the monsters, she will throw you. I quite enjoyed that detail of like your horse is freaking out, you gotta calm your horse down. So the only way to reduce the fear meter is to run away or to cast Axii. So I was like, oh, look at that, like, let's run the game, nice.
I think we all enjoy like every time Geralt uses the sign. I think everyone who's played the game is like, oh yeah, I do that too. Yeah, good job, Geralt. I would have done the same.
Like a little tidbit, when I was playing my character, my build for Geralt was very much reliant on, I think it was the like swordplay and sign casting. But I noticed that, Ciri sees this, she sees him casting this magical sign, and she compares it to the magic of a druid. And Geralt is just kind of like, not really. Like, that's not really what this is like. And though Witchers are supposed to be this sort of caste of mutated warrior monk monster killers that utilize their own magic, personally, I think a more appropriate term for their sort of like magical casting class is a warlock. And I think this word in particular really suits the magical abilities of Witchers the best. So if I had to compare Witcher magic to something, I would use the word warlock, not druid.
So it's like something a bit more basic, I guess, practical.
Yeah, and then the origin of the word warlock, I think, suits the Witcher backstories as well. I honestly found it interesting that the name of the Witcher books translated to The Witcher, because in my mind, it translates more to the word warlock. I love the word The Witcher. I love that they use that to describe, this group of warriors. But I personally just have a soft spot for the word warlock. It comes from the root word werloga, which means oathbreaker, and it translates to a male witch, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, that's cool.
And as far as these scenes like coming up on Nivellen's mansion, there's this little scene where they're riding through the woods at night, hearing these like, ethereal screeches in the background that reminded me very much from a cinematography standpoint of this scene in Lord of the Rings where the hobbits it was in the Fellowship where they're running through the woods at night
Yes.
trying to escape the
I
Nazgul.
thought the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, that looks just like that scene in Lord of the Rings. So I always love seeing, sort of vague cinematographic references to other films that I've seen.
Yeah, I was almost expecting the Ringwraiths music theme
Exactly.
to start
Yeah,
in the
I was like, wow,
background.
and it was even in slow-mo and everything, like the horse is like galloping.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yes, and then we come to the absence of the roses.
I know, yeah. In the trailers for season 2, I really thought we were going to see them, but it turned out to be a completely different flower that has its own importance, which we'll talk about in future episodes.
Yeah.
But when they showed a flash of blue nature sparkle thing, you had a tenth of a second to see it. I was like, blue roses. Alas, that's not what they were.
No. Honestly, I was quite disappointed because, would it have killed them to just throw some in the courtyard? It would have been so beautiful, especially during the fight scene. They don't have to provide any context for that. You know what I'm saying? The mansion is already magical as it is. There's things going on there that aren't natural. So I feel like they could have done that. Clearly it didn't really play into the story that they are telling because they didn't really talk about Nivellen's visitors that would come to collect the roses and things like that.
Yeah, it doesn't really sound like he had any either in this iteration.
But you guys know how I feel about the roses. I just have a personal, where are my roses?
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those things that in the iteration that it was, wouldn't have added or detracted from the story.
Yeah.
I do think visually to have something like that there in the dead of winter would have been beautiful to just kind of have that as part of the courtyard. However, I do wonder if the exterior of the house was purposefully made barren so that you could have that contrast with what magic does to the inside of the house and how kind of decrepit the whole place has become without Nivellen's help. And it's in the middle of winter, so everything is dead.
Yeah. Yeah, I was kind of sad because it's such a nice little detail in the short story, and it's such a nice reference to the 18th century Beauty and the Beast original story. So I was like, oh, it would have been nice to have Ciri trying to pick one of the roses or something.
Yeah.
I guess it would have maybe slowed down the pace a bit too much.
I feel like they could have woven as they're coming up on the mansion, before Nivellen bursts out, Ciri could have wandered off and been ooh, what a pretty rose, and then Nivellen bursts out. They didn't have to have much context. But I have to say, despite that, my first impression of Nivellen was awesome. I think the practical effects and the CG were excellent. They did a great job with casting of Christopher, and I think he really nailed the character.
Oh, absolutely. I know that I came into it with some uncertainty or skepticism just because of the age difference between Nivellen in the books, who's only supposed to be 22, 23-ish, versus Christopher, he must be in his 40s probably. So before the series came out, I obviously didn't really know what was going to happen when they adapted an older character. I think he did spectacularly. And as you said, the practical effects were super neat. Netflix has put out a ton of behind the scenes content after the show was aired. The arms were practical arms that they actually casted on him and that he wore these massive arm-length gloves. And the only thing that was CG was really the dead center of his face.
Yeah.
So it was, I think, much more successful than the previous practical effects that they've used in the past because it feels like they smartly combined the practical with CGI. Like we had already spoken about, the production value this second season of the show just feels so much higher. And I feel like this is one of those reasons.
It's a shame because when special effects are good, you don't even talk about them because you don't really notice them. And that's what tells you how good they are. So, yeah, it's just really incredible. And it is very expressive. I'd say it's one of the best Beauty and the Beast special effects we've had for the Beast. Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually just thinking about, I've never seen the Emma Watson version, but I have seen the behind the scenes of them filming the ballroom scene of Tale as Old as Time. And it's Emma Watson looking like Emma Watson does, just stunning. And then the actor who plays the Beast is on these small stilts and completely in a gray mocap suit. Yeah, and there's no... Girl had to act. She really had to act. The suit had the mask, but there was no costuming or anything that was done for the Beast. That all must have been in CGI, if I'm remembering correctly. So, as I said, it's really cool to have both the CGI and the practical one, to just make production easier, because you really only have to focus on that one part of the face. It gives the actors much more to play off of when it comes to having eyeline, mass, like they could actually see it. And it really feels like an actor's performance when they're in that combination of practical and CGI, because it's actually them moving and it's not anything else. It's really cool. I think they did a really good job, and you get Christopher's, like, he's so expressive.
Yeah, exactly. And he's got such good chemistry with Geralt and with Ciri. You really believe in their interactions. So yeah, it just works really well.
And as we continue on with the episode, once Geralt gets over his initial shock, Nivellen welcomes Geralt and Ciri into his home, and he draws up a bath for the girl using the house's magic. And after the two leave Ciri to her bath, she finds a white gown waiting for her as a pair of eyes in the ceiling watch. This is kind of a fun scene, you know. The house is in a bit of a rough state, but we see the magic. And the magic of the house in the books, I don't think it's like that explicit. It's just like, there were things. But there's no real indication as to like how the magic actually worked. So I feel like the production effect of just having stuff fall haphazardly from the ceiling is so fun. And I loved that, and I was absolutely delighted by it. So Nivellen calls for a bath, and just this golden bathtub full of water just plops from the ceiling and splashes water everywhere, and I loved it. I thought it was delightful.
Yeah, it's so good. And you see it from Ciri's perspective, you know. She's discovering Geralt's world and Geralt's job. Before that, you can tell she's a bit like, okay, what the fuck did I get into? And you can seeing her being so amazed at all the effects and enjoying the bath and everything is just really nice. And you can tell she's a bit like, maybe it won't be too bad. Maybe, yeah, he's got weird friends, but, you know, it should be okay. So, yeah, it's just really nice. It was just a really fun detail.
Yeah, I thought that the entrance into the mansion was really fun. I thought it was funny that Geralt refused to have a bath, even after Nivellen offers him one and notes that he reeks of old horse. I'm only bringing this up for those of you who've been asking me about releasing a Geralt scent. I'm working on it, but most of the time he smells fucking awful. So if you really want to smell like Geralt, you can go ride a horse for a week without bathing and gut some animals.
It's grim.
So are you going to do clean Geralt or smelly Geralt?
Geralt at the ball, yeah.
It just smells like soap.
Yeah.
I've had some fans of the book messaging me being like, I found it. I found where it is in the book. And I'm like, I know, don't worry. I'm working on it.
Oh, that's exciting.
But I like that they decided to have Verena interact with Ciri.
Yes.
Because obviously Ciri wasn't there in the original story. So I found that this particular interaction was very exciting. And just watching her and leaving her a gift of the dress. After that, I was very curious to see how that relationship would progress throughout the episode. I was like, whoa, okay, we've got like two ultra rare beings in the same house. This is a little explosive.
I mean, as we were watching the episode in this screening room, panning up after Ciri has gotten comfortable and she's getting dressed and she's relaxed, and you just pan up and you see these little eyes in the ceiling. It's like,
yeah.
I was deeply disturbed as I was watching this. But yeah, as you said, Charlotte, like definitely very curious about where their relationship could go now that Ciri is like this new factor in A Grain of Truth.
Yeah, it's just such a nice addition because obviously in the original story it's just Geralt against those monsters. It's just, you know, business as usual. But obviously adding Ciri, it adds this almost like gothic horror element to it, because it becomes about this young woman who, you know, arrives to this mysterious mansion that's full of secrets and monsters, and she's not really sure, like, who is the good guy, who is the bad guy, what's the deal with Nivellen? Does he have a scary attic wife who is going to murder her in her sleep, you know? And it just adds this little tension that I really like, and yeah, it becomes a bit more about Ciri than about Geralt, which is nice to sort of open their relationship.
Absolutely. And we get to dive into that a little bit more and to see the relationship build in the next scene as well. Before we get to the rest of the episode, we're going to take a break here. Next episode, join me, Charlotte from Vengerberg Glamarye, and Elsa from France as we continue our discussion of Netflix's The Witcher 201, A Grain of Truth. Thanks for joining us at the Breakfast Table. For show notes, transcripts of each episode, and complete lists of our social platforms and listening services, head over to breakfastandbeauclair.com. Breakfast and Beauclair is created by Alyssa from GoodMorhen. It's hosted by Alyssa with Tidings from Tidings, by Alyssa and Witcherflix. The show is edited by Alyssa with music and Mojo Filter Media. Breakfast and Beauclair is produced by Alyssa in New York City with Louise of Cover, the owner of the Churlish Porpoise, Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B, Ava of Gullet B, Haven of the Edge of the World, Sharp, Vengerberg Glamarye, Red Kite, the Original Roach, Codringer's Cat, Libby, Claire Odell, Jenny Mandilovich, Wolf, Corey from the US, John of Rivia, Tom from Australia, Joel Kate the Tabby Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, Kyle the H2 host, Silas Type Sorcerer, Toussaint Knight, Roxas, and Jeanette of Brooklyn. Special thanks to Charlotte and Elsa for joining us for this episode, and our international Hanza for their support.